Just when it seems like the Goblin Slayer anime series was getting a tad redundant, they throw a nice plot twist our way, and it all ends with delicious ice cream. Greetings, my fellow Slayers. It's time to take a look at another episode of Goblin Slayer. And just like the rest of the series, it completely lives up to its title. There's a lot of goblin slaying in this episode. It's pretty satisfying, and it also has a very nice plot twist ending. Nothing that's going to completely change the very foundations of Goblin Slayer, but at least it lets us know that not every storyline is going to be exactly the same, with going into a dungeon, fighting against some goblins, and fucking all sorts of shit up. That being said, if you were afraid that you weren't going to get any of that in this episode, don't worry, there is plenty of slaughter to be had. And it's basically just more of everything that you could possibly love about the series. But this is an overarching story which has been going on for a couple of episodes, where Goblin Slayer and his team have discovered this mystical mirror, which actually acts as a portal gate for all of these goblins to go through. And they have to desperately find a way to destroy this thing, while also not getting caught by a giant army of goblins. Guess what happens? That's right, Goblin Slayer and his team are attacked by a giant group of goblins, including the Goblin Champion, who severely wounded Goblin Slayer a couple episodes ago. Good news is the Goblin Slayer team is actually prepared this time, and they have a number of different trump cards actually planned. And basically it just amounts to shooting a lot of goblins in the faces with arrows, attacking them with all of the dwarf's giant rocks, and of course the lizard man summoning the power of his dinosaur brethren in order to summon the strength to bring this giant mirror down. Even the Goblin Champion is kind of a bitch in this episode, and Goblin Slayer ends up making an absolute fool of him in this episode. You could tell that he was a lot more confident going into this battle, and they actually literally end up bringing the entire building down on top of this group of goblins, not only being victorious, but actually being able to tear down this massive mirror and portal. Now, the thing is, why was this thing even there in the first place? I mean, did someone actually intentionally put it down there? Is it a part of some mysterious plot? Well, guess what? It actually is. Turns out the Sword Maiden is not as noble as she makes herself out to be. Despite the fact that she has an intense hatred and fear of goblins, no one seems to want to get rid of these things, so in order to bring awareness to it, she's actually the one who's been sort of responsible for allowing these goblins to sort of infest the sewers, and of course the city itself, knowing that eventually this will draw the attention of someone to eventually kill these things. Now, of course, the ends don't necessarily justify the means of this character, but she still doesn't really come across as super evil or malicious. She's just someone who has been completely destroyed emotionally and physically by these creepy little bastards. It's only Goblin Slayer and his team who could have actually been the ones to actually defeat these things. She's also responsible for bringing that giant albino alligator in the dungeon, which sort of was what sort of tipped off Goblin Slayer in the first place, realizing that there's something else going on here, and it's pretty clear that someone else is actually allowing these goblins to sort of run around and go crazy. I didn't realize that he would have this sort of Scooby-Doo gang style of investigation, but I appreciate it as it adds a little bit more depth to his character outside of the fact that he just loves decapitating little green goblins. What is interesting is that there really isn't any justice which is dealt to the Sword Maiden. He's just like, well, you fucked up, but if you ever have any goblins again, give me a call. The scene is dark, somber, and depressing, and just highlights the fact that really this Sword Maiden is going to be emotionally damaged for the rest of her life, and even when she tried to fix something, in many ways, she just ended up making it worse. Again, just showing us that this world is very harsh. But don't worry, there's going to be ice cream. So what's the rundown on this episode of Goblin Slayer? Another fantastic episode which is highlighting the dynamic between these characters, how they utilize their unique abilities to really murder the hell out of shit. Everybody had something cool to do in this episode. I especially love the Lizard Man, who's probably one of my favorite characters from the series. I love the entire gimmick of him being able to draw his power from ancient dinosaurs, whether it be iguanodons or velociraptors, or in this episode's case, a brontosaurus, which gives him the strength to grow his muscles and grab this giant mirror, ripping it from a stone wall and sending it toppling down on a group of goblins. The entire battle scene was pretty thrilling, but again, like the rest of the series, not really reinventing the wheel in terms of its technical, artistic integrity. Basically what I'm trying to say is, it's not the greatest animation in the world, but it still manages to be entertaining as hell. This is all because of the characters, of course. They're all really awesome in their very own way. The High Elf Archer in this episode was especially fun. She just will not admit that she is in love with the Goblin Slayer. There's even a funny scene at the end of the episode where she frickin' falcon kicks the hell out of him, sending him into a ravine, which looks really dangerous at first, but this is just the way that they play around, and honestly, Goblin Slayer has been through worse. It's also worth noting that Goblin Slayer himself, little by little, is starting to warm up more as a character, being less stoic and starting to show a little more emotion. I also really loved the funny scene of Priestess at the very end where she takes one of those canary feathers and puts it on his helmet. This is a nice callback to a scene from the last episode where they say that he should upgrade his armor, maybe by putting a feather into his helmet. I don't know, I thought it was a nice moment, and again, showing that there's a nice relationship between these two characters, which kind of comes across as like an older brother and little sister dynamic. I really like it. But let's get to the brass tacks. This episode certainly delivered on the action. Most of it was devoted to them fighting goblins, and it was basically just more of exactly what you'd like from the previous episodes, which is to say it's extremely violent and there's blood just exploding all over the place. It would be incredibly gratuitous if it wasn't backed up by the fact that there's the Sword Maiden's fan service, or just the funny fact that they all end it with ice cream. It's clear that even though Goblin Slayer has a really dark sense of sensibilities when it comes to displaying its scenes, it still manages to have a really good time while it's doing it, as well as honoring a lot of its fantasy brethren. I mean, the name of the episode is There and Back Again, which is a direct reference to The Hobbit, which is actually the book that Bilbo was writing about his entire life. It's pretty clear that the creator of Goblin Slayer has basically a giant hard-on for the fantasy genre, but at the same time, he just wants to coat it in buckets of blood. And this was another great example of just that, another super entertaining episode of Goblin Slayer, which, while not the most technically amazing looking thing in the world, continues to be pretty damn entertaining, and it had a pretty fantastic twist at the end of the episode, getting me even more hyped up for the future of the series and to see if this whole Demon Lord thing is actually going to come to fruition. What I will say is I'm going to give this episode right here a 4 out of 5. You guys need to check out the episode. I'd love to get your thoughts about it. However, tell me all of them in the comment section below. If you had any favorite scenes from this episode, maybe you didn't like this episode. What did you think about the plot twist of the Sword Maiden, and what would you like to see from the future of Goblin Slayer? Thank you all for watching this review. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down, baby.